So a little bit ago, Doug, we were talking about our fathers, and there's a similarity between them, but there's a generation that sort of looked at a tree, and when there were holes in the leaves, that was wrong. There was something really bad.
Right.
And how has that changed now?
For some people, it hasn't changed.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yes, if my father was here, he would still be spraying trees, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, for example, here's an oak tree with holes in it, but people have been looking at their plants for 100 years as if they were decorations, and you don't want anything wrong with your decoration. You want it to be perfect. And we had this idea that the humans were here and nature was someplace else, so it didn't matter if there was any nature where we live.
That's a very good point.
It does matter now. There is no someplace else in most places, so we have to learn to coexist with nature, and that means we have to allow our plants to capture the energy from the sun and then pass it on to other living things so that we have other living things.
Right.
We can't live on this planet with nothing else running the ecosystems that support us. So if you look at your oak tree and there's no damage on the leaves, that's a failed food web, because your oak hasn't passed on any of its energy. Oaks support more biodiversity than any other tree genus in the country. Wonderful things like the polyphemus moth. This is a polyphemus moth cocoon.
What does a polyphemus moth look like? Is it big?
Polyphemus moth is one of the giant silk moths.
Okay.
It is the second biggest giant silk moth in the country, so yes, it's big.
Okay.
All the giant silk moths are declining because they're attracted to lights. Everybody's got lights on.
That's true.
And the bats and the birds pick them off. Or we spray them. So if your father sprayed the branch that had the polyphemus caterpillar on it, it would die, of course.
So this is this overwintering structure, or is this?
Yes.
Okay.
It's going to overwinter as a cocoon.
Okay.
So we're trying to convince people now to allow things to eat their plants to some degree. There's a woman in New Orleans, Tallamy Baumgarten, who suggests that we all practice the 10-step program.
Okay.
Take 10 steps back from your tree and all of your insect problems disappear because you don't see the problems.
That's true.
But if I said, you know, you got hundreds of caterpillars on your tree, oh, spray it, kill the caterpillar. It's going to kill the tree. It's not going to kill the tree. The tree is adapted to having things eat it. It's a normal sequence of events.
And so when we were looking at this branch here, and you were pointing out the holes in the leaves, and again, most people would look at that and be panic struck. But there's also these really interesting little growths on the stem, and so obviously it's supporting what is eating the leaf, but it's also supporting something else. So we're talking about life in the tree actually supporting a lot of different life. This is something that most people will probably walk by and go, it's got a bump on it.
It's got a bump.
It's got a bump. Is that a good bump? So what is that bump?
It's called a gall.
Okay.
And oaks support more gallers than other types of trees. They're made by little wasps in the family Cynipidae.
Okay.
So they're cynipid gall wasps. And they lay an egg in the expanding oak tissues, and along with that egg, they insert plant hormones that manipulate the growth of the cells that form a protective case around the larva of that wasp. This is a bigger gall.
Yes.
And you'll notice that it's hollow. And the galler would be right in the middle of it. The reason it's hollow is because gall wasps have a lot of natural enemies. They've got other wasps that want to lay their eggs in those wasps. So they manipulate the gall so that the wasps that want to lay their eggs in it can't get their ovipositors down there. They can't reach it when it's hollow. So it's in a safe site now. The only time they can lay an egg in the gall is when it's expanding very quickly. There's a tiny little time window there. So the structure of the gall often is in response to all those natural enemies that are trying to control it.
Interesting.
But a single oak tree can support 70 species of gallers and all different types on the tree.
So what we're getting at then is that if you see something like this on your tree this winter, this is good.
That's good.
Do not spray it. Do not cut it off. Leave it be. So, and I have to ask, does something eat this moth? naturally?
Everything eats that.
Everything eats it.
Yeah.
So this in turn is feeding something else.
Absolutely.
Which I think is
Birds
good.
in particular.
Birds in particular,
A
yes.
bird that gets a polyphemus caterpillar, and often they're cardinals. They love those large caterpillars.
Okay, okay.
That's a big meal.
So that's a big meal. Okay, well that's good. So so anyway, I just you know, and summing up, and then if you see these little lumps and bumps on it, and it doesn't have to be just on the stem, you might actually see some on leaves. And we had a couple, I thought, here with maybe it was this guy right here, and there's one on a leaf.
Exactly. Right. Same thing.
Same
Cynipid gall wasp.
Okay.
Different species though.
Okay.
They all have a species-specific shape, and they do it in a species-specific place. And that's how you get that 70 species on a single tree.
That's it.
Right.
Okay, so again, when you look at a tree and you're seeing holes, or you see growths, or you see things hanging from it, those are good things. So you know, and the oak tree is one of those plants that supports more of those other insects and wasps than any other tree.
Let me give you an example of how much more.
How much more?
Tulip tree, it's a, tallest, straightest tree in our forest.
Yep.
It supports 21 species of caterpillars.
Okay.
Oak, 557.
Okay.
950 nationwide. So there's nothing that comes close to an oak tree in terms of supporting the biodiversity around
So
us.
is that 557 in New Jersey and Delaware area?
In the mid-Atlantic states.
Mid-Atlantic states.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Why do we want all these caterpillars? Because
Why?
that's what's feeding the birds.
Yes.
It takes thousands and thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of chickadee.
So, and I've read your book, and I think I've read somewhere around 550 caterpillars a day.
A day. So that totals up, depending on the number of chicks in the nest, to 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to get them to leave the nest. And then they continue to feed them caterpillars. The parents continue to feed the babies after they leave the nest for another 21 days.
Okay.
So you're really talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of a bird that's a third of an ounce.
So if you're planting a tree this fall or next spring, preferably if it's going to be B&B next spring, because oaks are fall dog hazards, plant an oak. So Ida hit a couple of weeks ago, and we have forest fires out in California. And one of the things that's really tops right now on the news is, for at least for a short period, is global warming. And that, of course, leads to the fact that there's more carbon dioxide in the air. And and one of the buzzwords that we hear fairly consistently nowadays is carbon sequestration. You had made a mention at one point that oaks are one of the best plants for carbon sequestration. Why is that?
Well, carbon sequestration, that's plants pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then they build their tissues out of it. Mm-hmm. And they also pump it into the soil. That's the part we often forget about. The plants that do that best are long-lived, so they hold the carbon a long time. They have very dense tissues. Mm-hmm. And oaks are long-lived, and they have very dense tissues. So there are some other trees that are good carbon sequesters, but because oaks are the largest and the longest lived, and they have huge root systems that pump that carbon in. In most places, they are the very best carbon sequesters.
Okay. And just touch a second, and I know this is not your specialty, but you touched on it, and I think it's sort of an interesting thing. So when we were looking at, and you mentioned the root system, but also underground storage, what in reference are you looking at? Fungus, or what is it that allows the tree to store soil in the ground?
It is very complicated, and you're right, I am not a soil scientist. But as I understand it, the roots of plants grow constantly, and many of them have mycorrhizal associations. Mm-hmm. The mycorrhizae are covered with a carbon sheath called glomalin. And that grows along with the roots, and the mycorrhizae exchange nutrients with the tree, but they follow the growing root system, right, and they leave the glomalin behind. So as the tree, and then that glomalin is carbon in the soil, which is very stable. Our soils are brown or black because of carbon that plant roots have deposited there over the eons. And every time we plow it up or turn it, that carbon vaporizes and goes up into the atmosphere again. So leaving land undisturbed and well planted sequesters a lot of carbon.
Yes, so when you look at topsoil and it has that nice dark brown color to it, and you wonder why is that top 12 inches or 6 inches that beautiful color and very friable, and then down below it's because of the fungus, and it's because of the tree roots and so forth. So fascinating interaction. But again, another good reason for planting oaks is that you are, in a tree at a time, you are slowing down the whole warming of the earth.
And some people say, well, that's not going to solve the problem because the trees aren't long enough lived. But an oak, an average lifespan of a healthy oak is 900 years. We look at a 100-year oak, we say, that's an old one. That's a baby. That's a baby. They usually don't live that long because we chop up their roots, they hit a driveway, or they hit a sewer line, or we spray them, and we don't put the leaf litter underneath them to exchange the nutrients. So we do a lot of things that make them not live that long. But a healthy oak, 900 years. The longest lived oak in this country is in South Carolina. It's 1,500 years old.
Wow.
So that's a long, I'll take that when we're storing carbon.
That's impressive, yes.
Yeah.
So, and you touched on this. This is one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, that leaf litter. Now, you know, once again, my dad would take the leaves and put them in bags, and they often went out at the curb, and off they went, and done. No more leaves.
Well, my father would line them on the curb and burn them.
Oh, even better. I like that.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so and now we're starting to look at, you know, how long do leaves actually stay on the ground? Because if you look at a maple leaf, it's there for half a year, 6 months, 8 months or so.
At the most.
Yeah. And then if you look at oak leaves, they last a long, long time, and you're advocating that that's actually beneficial for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, a single oak leaf can last 3 years before it breaks down. We need leaf litter on the ground because it's a blanket that protects the soil ecosystem. It keeps the moisture in, and all of the soil organisms need moisture. There are more species that live underground than above the ground, so it's a vibrant ecosystem. They're all tiny, but they're very important.
Speaking of ecosystem, yeah,
This is nature right here.
A bird jumping out of a tree next to us.
But what do? We rake up our leaves and we discard them. In those leaves are the nutrients that tree used to grow that year. And if we throw it out, we've just gotten rid of all of those nutrients.
Correct.
If you allow, I like to think of leaf litter the way we think of water now. We want all the water that falls on our property to stay on our property.
Yes.
You want all the leaves that fall on your property to stay in your property too, so that they break down and return the nutrients to the soil so that your tree can take it up in a steady state. You don't have to add fertilizer.
Yep.
It's very hard to add the right amount of fertilizer.
That's true, it is.
But keep that leaf litter on site and you don't have to. And you're also protecting the root systems. There's so many good things about it. People rake it up because they don't want it on their lawn.
Yeah.
But I also advocate cutting your lawn in half.
Yep.
And putting beds around your trees, and that's where the leaf litter goes.
Right, allowed to go down and plant native plants obviously underneath it.
Exactly.
And in one of your books too, you advocated or mentioned the fact that a lot of the caterpillars actually drop to the ground as they go through the pupation stage, and they do not. We always think they just stay on the tree, but no, in reality, that leaf litter and being on the ground is very important. Very important.
This can be hard to see, but that's called a crown slug caterpillar.
Okay.
It's not a slug, but its head is tucked up underneath, and it so they call it a slug.
Okay.
It's through growing, and in the next day or so, it's going to drop to the ground. It will spin a tight little cocoon in leaf litter.
In leaf litter, okay.
You got to have that leaf litter.
Okay.
And then it spends the winter in that leaf litter. So if you rake it up and burn it and throw it out, you've just thrown out that guy. If this cocoon falls to the ground, or if you have a luna moth or something else that pupates on the ground, you're throwing all those guys out.
Yep.
That's next year's food source for all those chickadees that need all those caterpillars.
That's right.
So there's great biodiversity value to keeping your leaf litter on site.
Okay. So as we start to approach fall, and some of those leaves are beginning to drop as we speak, don't rake them all up. Point being is that you want to keep them underneath the trees and then actually make it a bed and then add more plant material to it, which will in turn protect the wildlife that actually falls from the tree.
A lot of people want to mulch them in their mower.
Yes.
Of course, that kills everything too. So,
Yep.
And it cuts down the oak that would have lasted 3 years, then only lasts a few months because you've chopped it up into tiny little bunches.
Okay. So I might be altering the lecture I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. But in any case, very good points. So thank you. So we had Ida, which we just mentioned. The 100-year storms seem to be coming every year to 6 months, every weekend, unfortunately, yes. And we're looking at all different ways to, well, actually we're seeing all the damage that happens to the streams and so forth, and a lot of this because there's good sheet flow that happens across turf, which is obviously not what we want to be advocating. So one of the things that you had mentioned in your book was about how oaks are really good at absorbing or slowing down or allowing deep water infiltration of stormwater. So how does all that happen?
Well, it's plant roots that break up the soil enough so that you get infiltration when it rains. When it rains really hard, you want a big canopy to soften the pounding of the raindrops.
Okay.
Raindrops actually can compact the soil when there's nothing. But the big canopy of the oak tree softens the hard rains. It drips down, and then that huge root system allows much of that water to infiltrate. Now that's true of all plant roots, but lawn has very short plant roots. So in terms of encouraging infiltration, lawn's probably the worst choice, particularly in the summertime where it gets sunbaked and the ground is very, very hard. So all plants with their roots are encouraging water to stay on site, but oaks do it better than others. So it's just another attribute.
Yep. So I have an image I use in one of the talks where we have Kentucky bluegrass, which has a depth of about 6 inches, and then we have some prairie plants which are getting down 10, 12, 14 feet in the ground, which is just amazing. So yeah, when you look at bluegrass lawn, you don't realize how short the infiltration
is. Which is why we have to water it.
Yes.
And in so many places we don't have the water for that.
Yeah.
Either, so.
Has there been any studies to show how deep the root system or how wide the root system of an oak tree could go or be?
There was one attempt. There was a group in Europe that wanted to see how far Quercus robur, the king's oak, how far it would go out from the center of the tree. So they started digging, and they dug up the root. They got 300 feet from the tree, and they gave up.
Wow, that's impressive.
So the idea that it stops at the drip line is not accurate. They just keep going.
Yep. Yeah, so people always think that the edge of the canopy, which they call the drip line, is where the roots magically end. But obviously from this study, and we've known from others too, that the root system goes far beyond that. So in any case, oaks just happen to have one of the best root systems as well for gathering up water. So one more sort of check for the oaks.
That's right. Very good.
So one of the things that fascinates me about oaks, among all the other things that we've been mentioning, are acorns. And one of the things that I picked up in your book was, and it was something that I always was sort of fascinated with, because if you notice that some years, all the oaks produce acorns at once. And I think you referred to that as a mast year,
Masting, yes.
if I pronounced it right. So, and I never really, I sort of took note of it because the cars were crunching the heck out of it, and we had dust and pieces of acorn everywhere. But never really thought about that being an interesting technique for the plant to be doing something ecologically beneficial, which I want you to talk about.
Right.
But the other thing which I find fascinating is the different shapes. And I know we have all sorts of different sizes here, and the acorns vary from little guys to, look at the size of this sucker here, which you said is red oak?
That's a big red oak, right?
Red oak, yep.
It's a tiny little willow oak.
Tiny willow oak.
Yeah, and this is a red oak too, but it's in between.
And it's a little bit smaller, yeah.
So there's a lot of variation in acorn size.
Tremendous. And this is what willow oak looks like. It actually looks like a willow, gets its name. And this is what the red oak leaf looks like, which is typical of what you typically think of as oak. But, so aside from masting, you also mentioned in the book about how oaks developed in Asia, which I never would have thought of, and how they also developed at the same time as jays, like blue jays. And there's a correlation there, a story.
Yeah, there's a mutualism. The jay lineage and the oak lineage evolved in the same place in Southeast Asia, and they slowly spread across Eurasia and back. Well, the continents had started to separate at that point, but somehow they got, I guess they went through Alaska, got to North America. It's a mutualistic relationship because the oaks give the jays something to eat in the form of acorns that they eat in the wintertime. But the jays provide oaks with the ability to move. They can move farther and faster than any other tree genus in the world. And that's because jays will pick up an acorn from an oak and they'll fly up to a mile from the tree.
That's
and then they tap it below the surface of the soil. And then they're supposed to go get it in the wintertime.
Right.
But for every 4 acorns they bury, they only remember where one is. So that for every 4 acorns they bury, they're actually planting 3 acorns, or 3 oak trees. And you mentioned a mast year. When there's a mast, a single jay can bury 4,500 acorns in a fall. So jays are moving oaks all over the place.
Yes, they are.
And so when the glaciers came down and retreated, oaks moved up faster than anything else because of those jays. They have a special little hook on their bill that helps them rip open the acorns. So that's a perfect example of a mutualism. Why do oaks mast? It's called predator satiation. They want to overwhelm all of the things that eat acorns, and there's a lot of things that eat acorns. A single oak can make 3 million acorns in its lifetime. So a lot of things have grown very fond of those protein-rich nuts.
Yes.
And if oaks made the same amount of acorns every year, the populations of those acorn eaters would stabilize around here, and they'd eat all the acorns. So oaks have gotten smart. They make a whole bunch one year, and it's more than their predators that are around can eat. Then the next year they make hardly any. Maybe 2 or 3 years with hardly any. So those predator populations crash. Then there's very few squirrels and everything to eat. And then all of a sudden they make a ton of acorns again and they overwhelm the acorn eaters. That's the explanation.
That's the explanation. So, but yeah, I mean, it really is an interesting phenomenon, and I never really put jays and acorns and oaks together, but it really. So if you're in an area and you don't have any oaks anywhere near, and all of a sudden you get an oak tree coming up, and you wonder how that happened, it was because the blue jay forgot where it planted dinner. So, and in turn it planted an oak tree. So,
and keep in mind, it's not just blue jays. It's jay species all over the world have this relationship with oaks. So I think we have 7 or 8 species of jays in North America. And they all move those acorns. As a matter of fact, they're trying to reestablish a species of jay on the Channel Islands out past California. No, they're trying to establish the oaks on the island. So what they're doing is using the jays there by putting out acorns, and the jays are going and planting them all over the place. So
low labor. So gotta love that. So,
exactly.
Well, Doug, as a person who has read all your books several times, but
more than I have.
But it's been a real joy for me to sit here today and talk about plants and oaks. It's just, it's a special treat, and I know that our viewers will enjoy it as well. So thank you so very much.
It has been fun.
Yes.
Hey, I'm Mary Tabbitt. I'm here today at Fernbrook Nursery, and I've got Larry Kuzer here. Larry, so nice to see you again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for coming here and doing all this.
So Larry, what's going on today? I see a lot of people here.
A lot of people here today. So, yeah, we've got the New Jersey Nursery Landscape Association doing their summer symposium. We've got about 100 folks here today. The focus is on native plants, and so we're honored to host the program today, and we're also very honored to have Dr. Doug Tallamy from University of Delaware as a keynote speaker talking about the specialty trees, especially oak trees, that we should all be planting in our yards. Absolutely.
I remember the last time we came and we spoke how you really educated me on what we need to plant in the yards. Most people think that they're just going to put a bird feeder out there and that'll take care of everything.
Right. So it's interesting, speaking of birds, I mean, what happens is, and Dr. Tallamy can fill us in on that, is that the trees and the plants support the insects that the birds need. And without those insects, the birds have literally, especially little chicks in the nest, and they die. And Audubon Society has told us that since 1950, 70 years, almost 50% of the songbird population of North America has declined almost 50%. I mean, that is
Amazing.
just
Yeah,
amazing.
that's
Just
crazy.
amazing. It's crazy. And we can change that. Every single one of us has the power to change that by what we plant in our yards. That's the key.
So interesting. So Larry, when did you get started in this? And like, where did you get the love of all of this?
So I grew up here. I'm very fortunate. This is a 240-acre farm, which my grandfather purchased in the 1890s. As a kid, we always had a huge vegetable garden, and I loved growing things. And then really, as I say, I quit my day job in 1982, and I started the nursery business. We tried to do retail business in the beginning, and we're kind of off the beaten path, so it didn't work so well. And now we're a wholesale nursery. We sell from Maine to Virginia, and we've been going since 1982, and praise the Lord, it's been successful.
How old are these trees here?
Well, this is interesting. They look a lot older than they are. There's a big American beech right there you're looking at, and my father and I actually planted that.
Wow.
So I'm going to put that around 70 years old.
Wow.
And then there's a black oak right over there, and that oak, I planted that black oak maybe 10 years ago. So it loves the soil. You can tell what it's doing.
Yeah.
And this pin oak here, that's probably 30 or 40 years old. So they're not that old.
Okay. They look like 200 years old, right?
They look like we do have about a 200-year-old American sycamore on that end of the house. It's probably 20 feet all the way around it. So we got some old ones.
Awesome. So Larry, you also have a B&B here and catering?
Yep. So this house we use as a bed and breakfast. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of events, especially weddings and things on the weekends. We have an environmental education program. I like to say we have 50 to 100 kids on this farm every day. Teaching them about the environment, teaching them all about native plants, teaching them about where their food comes from, all that kind of stuff. And of course we have the nursery, and we also grow about 20 acres of organic vegetables here as well, and have a CSA that people can sign up for and be a part of.
The school, do schools come here, or is this like a personal,
schools do come here. Yeah, we do a lot with homeschool families. Mm-hmm. We have schools that come here. We now have, and of course with all this COVID business and stuff where kids had to be home, so what we do is if kids literally, if they have to be virtual in school, mm-hmm. and they're only there half a day, then the other half a day they can come here to Fernbrook and go out in the woods and learn things and have some fun.
Larry, thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to see the rest.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is John Belaney, owner of Belaney Contracting Company. I'm a certified nursery landscape professional and proud member of the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association. Each and every day I get asked questions regarding my career, plants, grading, trees. And the one question that sticks in mind today is, what is your go-to plant? What is your go-to plant when you come across soil that's compacted or filled with clay, or extremely wet, extremely shady? Maybe you're not going to get any cooperation from the homeowner. For me, 3 plants come in mind. 3 plants. The little Henry Sweetspire, beautiful flowers, handles shade or sun. All the varieties of the spirea, and the Clethra anifolia, which is summer sweet. 3 great plants will adapt to any situation you have. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.